May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Yet, whatever gains I had, these I have come to regard as loss because of Christ. Paul's letter to the people of Philippi is a personal one. The church of Philippi was Paul's very first, born from a conversation with a woman who's dealt in purple fabric named Lydia. It was her home and household that becomes the very first of Paul's not required to first convert to Judaism churches. And yet, he's writing them today because he's found them embroiled in the exact same debate that was going on across many of the early churches. How much Jew is still required to follow Christ? Now, I personally have this deep love for so much of the Jewish faith and tradition and our Jewish roots. And sometimes I do think that Paul's letters get taken a little too far and we lose a little of our heritage in the process. But it's important to go back into these letters and see what his actual argument is. Because his actual argument isn't about the participation in ritual or even the identity. He's arguing instead about the place of entitlements and privilege in a church community. Because at the time, being first Jewish before following Christ, for many gave them status. And they thought within their church community it meant them better than, or more important than, or more informed than the Gentiles or Greco-Romans who had followed in Jesus but had not converted to Judaism first. Paul gives only one answer to the question of entitlements and privilege in a church community, that they are to be used to the benefit of those who actually need them. And that is the only time to bring them up at all. Paul had all the Jewish entitlement and privilege he needed. And honestly, a decent amount of Roman entitlement and privilege to boot. He checked all the boxes on being a good Jew. He followed the rules. He remained pure and righteous. He was informed and educated. He was also a Roman citizen, which gave him the ability and freedom to travel the empire, planting all these churches in the first place. And at the time he is arrested, the numerous times in Acts, and including the time that ends in his own death sentence, he actually makes demands that are followed while he is arrested because of the nature of his citizenship as a Roman. Now, he could have used all of this to his own advantage. And frankly, at the beginning of Acts, that is exactly what he is doing. He is complacent in murder. He uses his power and authority to seek out those heretical ideas that are sprouting out of Judaism that he loved and knew so well. And he makes it his personal mission to gain power on the backs of damaging others and undermining this new church that's forming. And God stops him in his tracks. God sends him back to basics, making him a novice of an entirely new faith, and then empowers him to take all those things that were once just for his own benefit and use them instead to benefit God. As Paul weighs in on the lording over of some within his beloved church of Philippi, he uses himself as the prime example. He points out through his own accolades all the things that the world considers entitlements, the things that in the church of Philippi would grant him way more power and authority than anyone else. And he notes that Christ instead has turned these on their head and helped him understand these entitlements as actually responsibility. This is the Christian virtue of therefore. Now, it is best encompassed in that very spiritual diatribe of Spider-Man. I'm serious about that. The motto of Spider-Man, you may know it, say it with me if you do, with great power comes great responsibility. This is actually the Christian virtue of therefore, Who knew it was also in Marvel? It is one of the most intentionally overlooked of our Christian virtues as well. The virtue of therefore begs the unpopular and uncomfortable question, not about what we have earned, not about what we have deserved, not about what we are justified to do or receive, but instead asks us to consider our responsibility as a follower of Christ in the moment. It further calls us to question, what is my potential involvement in this situation? Particularly, do I have power to make the circumstances better in how I interact and engage? Now, the cultural norm also considers itself a therefore reaction, but it is not the same therefore. Culturally, we're used to a therefore that has much more to do with retribution and reward. If you are rude to me, I am justified to be rude back to you. If I work hard or am just better situated for any number of reasons that I have extra or benefits or special treatment, then it is deserved, and I owe you nothing. That really is the underlying question as a Christian disciple, though. What is it that God says we owe one another? Now, for a country that has so long took the Protestant work ethic deeply to heart, we sometimes lose the combination of holding ourselves to a high standard while simultaneously holding others with a high standard of generosity and grace. I work hard, and therefore you should too. I work hard, and therefore I deserve what's coming to me. This, therefore, while valuing consequence and personal responsibility, doesn't actually reorder us into God's priorities. It just makes a new justification and self-aggrandizing that's veiled as virtuous living. It is yet another mechanism that gives us ability to put ourselves on top and find reasons that you must go lower. The truth is, there is no possible way to read Christ that justifies our hierarchy over one another, despite how many times we try to baptize it, cultivate it into virtues, and claim that somehow God picked me over you. Where we say, earn it, Jesus says, forgive 7 times 70 times. We say, but I'm doing all the right things and I've earned it. And Jesus says, and watch me eat with prostitutes and tax collectors. We say, but I'm justified. And Jesus says, yeah, but when you really look at it, you probably could be doing it better, couldn't you? Consider the parable today. The tenants feel justified. They've worked hard on this land and they want the produce and the profits. So much so that they've even killed the son, assuming that if there's no heir, then they'll be the de facto heirs and the land will be theirs. But see, it was never their land to begin with. The landowner purchased, designed, and set it up for a particular type of production. And their limited view only took into account what they felt justified to receive, not the larger intent or the possibility of the property. If from the get-go we realize that our lives are not our own, they are a gift, then it reshapes our entire perspective on what we are owed in the first place. Our lives are a gift from the very beginning. They are a gift by the virtue of our baptism, where we say we are buried with Christ and risen into resurrection. And in this gift, this understanding of our whole lives as gift means we can justify ourselves in nothing. The privilege, the entitlements, they're just not ours. They're for our good use, our investment, meant to pay dividends for the world that God designed and assumed for a particular type of production. Therefore, that which is mine isn't actually mine. Whether it's my money or my prestige or even my good circumstances or the power I find myself with, it is not for me. It is for my good use. And as Christian disciples, we know good use actually is defined as God's use. I have things for God to use. We are not merely vessels or pass-throughs, however, but amplifiers. The potential comes through us and produces for God, for the next amplifier to take that as gift and do therefore for God. So when someone says something rude or terse, and maybe I could make a pretty solid argument that I'm justified in my power in that moment to embarrass or retaliate or match rude for rude. My Christian virtue of therefore actually calls me to use that power to rise to the occasion, to view it with empathy, to express my hurt honestly, or maybe even gasp in the right situation, humbly own that I was wrong in that situation, even if I think their response could have been kinder or more graceful. Take what it was in the beginning that maybe I was in the wrong in the first place. When asked to notice how my circumstances may be benefiting me, from my economic status to my race to my prestige, to even just my capacity to manage chaos, instead of getting defensive in that moment and trying to justify that I've earned it or I deserve it or that they should back off, my Christian therefore is asking me instead to look at those circumstances and ask, how are they supposed to be being used to benefit others rather than myself? I will be forever grateful to one of my classmates in seminary, because my second year of seminary, I was pregnant for what felt like the entire year, maybe more, and then had a baby my third year of seminary. And if you've ever had a child during grad school, you know that it is not an easy go. And I didn't a single time argue my case for anything, because a man in seminary argued everything on my behalf before I had to open my mouth. While I was still pregnant, he is the one who went to administration and demanded changing tables in all the restrooms, both male and female. He was the one who demanded the creation of a lactation room and made sure it was fully funded with a mini refrigerator and a sound machine. He also was the one loudly telling everyone that nobody was required to use that lactation room and any nursing mother should be nursing wherever she saw fit or was comfortable. He was the one who went into the first, we had to redo our chapel, longer story for a different sermon. He was the one who came in and said, where's the space for small children? Where are all these toddlers going? And he was the one who demanded that there be built a soft space for toddlers to be in our daily worship together as community. I've been in many a meeting to where there are people to whom deference is given, and they have chosen in those moments to make sure that they use their voices to amplify the opinions, wisdoms, and perspectives of those given less esteem. I've watched at holy households where very informed adults turn to some of the younger members of their tables and make sure that their answers are heard, where the moments when they catch it right, they repeat them louder for other people to catch. I've been in vestry meetings where someone gets talked over and somebody else who has more power in that situation jumps in and says, wait, let's go back to that comment. I think we missed it. I have been awed in school communities that acknowledge that their school populations have a very diverse economic spread, sometimes being a fourth to even half of the school population being designated as financially disadvantaged. And those schools still creatively and gracefully make sure that money doesn't get in the way of any single child's participation in any activity. Not only the academic ones, the ones that you could claim like a field trip where everyone should go, but I've watched it happen for dances, for even fundraisers to say, how do we make sure every kid participates and every kid is here? So Paul in his letter makes his list out. He goes through all of the things. This is what I have. This is what I could be. And then he tells them, because I've seen it all as God's and I use it for Christ, here's what actually was possible in my life. This global church touching every part of the Roman Empire. Paul is calling us to make our own list out. What do you have? Money, time, accolades, expertise, deference, power even? How do you manifest that it's not yours, but you're investing it in God? Your life is meant to amplify the gifts that God has given you. As Paul puts it, yet whatever gains I had, these I have come to regard as loss because of Christ. We are all workers of the vineyard in a creation that isn't ours. And yet we get the great benefit to enjoy, to produce, to contribute to it. Christ calls us to our therefore. Therefore, we are called not to justify, but for generosity. We are called not to entitlement, but distribution. Live discipleship as God's great therefore is declared in everything you have and everything you receive. Amen.